We see this not just with young children, of course, but if me and my friends begin to play a game of basketball, very quickly, yo mama jokes are going to come out. Also, if we look not just at my personal experience with making fun of professors and my sister and my friends, but in ancient texts, if you read the story in the Bible of David and Goliath, that actually starts out with a story of trash talking. They're standing on different sides of a valley, and they're just yelling at each other back and forth. It's something that we see across cultures and across time. So we want to talk about what this idea of trash talk is. Yeah, I really don't want to get into that right now, should we? So obviously, we have this idea in our heads of what trash talk is. I found a good definition. It says, in the course of a competitive situation, putting down your opponent verbally or saying how good you are, often involving talk of mothers and sisters. And this is from the Urban Dictionary, so it's probably a little bit informal or colloquial. Let's look at a more precise definition. It's a deliberate form of verbal communication utilized by individuals for both affirmative purposes, personal reasons like motivation and fun, and disruptive motives towards the opponents. Now, that's from the Journal of Applied Psychology, and it's very wordy. Essentially, it means that we use trash talk as a way to make ourselves feel better, to feel more confident. I was actually watching a documentary on a guy named Reggie Miller. Has anybody heard of him? He was a basketball player in the 90s, apparently. And he was one who would use a lot of trash talk. And he actually says it was 70% for me to feel better about myself and 30% to put the other person down. And actually, at one point in a playoff game against the Knicks, he got a guy to headbutt him. He got so intense in his trash talking here. So some other notorious trash talkers. If you look over here on the left, we've got Muhammad Ali, who is a very crazy trash talker, for lack of a better term. At one point, whenever he was undefeated, he literally said that the man who would beat me has not been born yet. And he was obviously in a position to say this because he'd never been beaten before. Notice the guy in the middle, that's Satchel Paige, who along with Jackie Robinson was one of the guys who broke the color barrier in baseball. He threw 4 balls over the course of an at-bat, and the batter walked to first base. And he addressed the batter, and he said, "There you are." And then he went 1, 2, 3 on the next 3 batters and said, "And there you will stay." So he wasn't going to move. Also, on the end, Larry Bird, a notorious trash talker, apparently in the course of a game with Julius Erving, who is Dr. J, a very good basketball player, up and down the court, every time they'd go, he'd just say, 42-5, 42-5. And that was how many points Larry Bird had in the last game versus Dr. J in the last game, which was 42-5. One more story about Larry Bird. I've got all kinds of stories about him, but one in particular, it was towards the end of a game, and it was the last possession or getting down towards that time, and he came up to the guy who was defending him, and he said, "Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the ball, I'm going to dribble twice, I'm going to spin, I'm going to pump fake, and I'm going to put it in your eye." And so, come off the timeout, he gets the ball, he dribbles down, stops, spins, whatever order I set it in, and he puts it in his eye, and he begins to swear very violently. And the guy who was covering him was like, "Why is he swearing? He just, basically won the game." And he asked Larry Bird, and he said, "I didn't mean to leave 2 seconds on the clock." So there was this idea that we see of how to trash talk effectively. We want to make ourselves, as we see here some wrestlers looking eye to eye, we want to make ourselves look very big. We want to make ourselves look as good as we possibly can for our own confidence, but also to make others feel inferior. We want to kind of ignore things that aren't so good. For example, with the story of Satchel Paige, there's probably plenty of times that he walked a batter and then maybe gave up a hit that led to a run or something like that, but that's not the one we talk about. But we want to make ourselves look as good and as big as we can, and we want to ignore things that don't go away. So now we turn from just some things that we see in pop culture and we see in my personal experience to something with a little bit of rigor. And so as much as it pains me as a math guy, I'm going to have to turn to sociology. In this sociology study, which used where we got that definition of trash talk from earlier, they decided, how can we design an experiment that would figure out, is trash talking really effective? What does it do for us? And so they went to, shockingly, a group of people that use a lot of trash talk, and that is 20-year-old college males playing video games. So it was a very right place to look for a lot of trash talk, and they set them up playing Madden 2008. Now, before we understand what actually happened here, we're going to have to go through some terminology, so we get to learn a little bit here. We have this idea of self-efficacy, which is essentially a measure of confidence. So what you do is you measure how confident someone feels before an activity, and then you measure it after, and we see how much the activity has effect on how they feel. And then also we have positive effect, which is essentially happiness, and negative effect, which is frustration or sadness or things like that. The way we figure these out is you have someone fill out a questionnaire with words like, do you feel happy? Do you feel excited? And then you rate those responses. And then also it'll have questions like, do you feel sad? Do you feel frustrated? Do you feel angry? Rate those questions and then collaborate those things and then do it before an event and after an event. And it gives us at least a pretty good idea of how people feel in regards to that event. Now this may come as a shock to you, but apparently the happier you feel and the higher your positive effect is, the lower your negative effect is. So the fancy word for that is inverse correlation, I think. I made it up. Cool. We're going to call it inverse correlation. So what did this study find now that I've stopped making things up? Essentially, when it came to the self-efficacy, they would have these groups of people, and they split them up into two groups. One would trash talk during the first game and then be silent during the second game, and one would be silent during the first game and then trash talk during the second game. So what we found out is the people who trash talked and then were silent in the second game, when they won both games, they had the most confidence. Out of everybody, they won both times, they trash talked, it was great. The people who were silent the first game and then talked, they actually gained more confidence in the game in which they trash talked, which seems to make sense. We use this as a way to make ourselves feel more confident. Now the people who trash talked in the first game and then were silent in the second game, it kind of went like this, and then it just fell off the face of the planet. It's almost like that phenomenon that we see how whenever you have to kind of sit and be quiet and think about what you've done, it doesn't make you feel very good. And so the same thing happens with trash talk. And then the silent talk that lost both games, they had significantly more confidence, though, in the game in which they did trash talk. So as for the positive effect and the negative effect, so this is a little bit wordy, but essentially, regardless of winning or losing, the game in which the players were allowed to trash talk in resulted in a larger increase in PA and decrease in NA. But ironically, the only ones who had the greatest change, though, in PA was the ones who were silent in their first game, if that makes sense. So if they didn't trash talk, they actually felt better after the first game than if they did, which is kind of strange because we have this idea that trash talking makes us feel better. So the questions that we want to ask is, how does this help us more? The first thing is trash talking obviously increases confidence. So if you want to feel confident, trash talk away. But it doesn't necessarily increase how much fun you have. So those who won essentially had just as much fun if they trash talked or if they didn't. So what it appears is that we have somewhat of a I think it's called a confirmation bias, where we see something and we expect it to happen, and so when it does, we check that off as, okay, this is the way it works. So we trash talk and we expect, hey, I trash talked, I'll do better, and then we win, and then we think, oh, okay, it was because of the trash talk. Well, in fact, what actually happens is that the fun probably comes from winning. So there's the talk for you this evening. Thank you so much for your time.